going? It's your boy Luke here with a course report for the Honda Classic. I was just walking the grounds for the Wednesday Pro-Am, getting an idea, a little bit of a scouting report of what to expect for this week, and honestly, nothing really groundbreaking. The course looks like it usually does year in and year out, but a few things to note. I was able to ask a player what they thought the course was going to be like, and they gave me a very similar answer. It was Chase Koepka, who played this course last year, told me it looked the exact same right about 12 months ago. So, like I said, it didn't look all that drastically different, but there are a few things I noticed that might come into play this year that we'll talk about throughout the video, but it was a blast to be out there. It's going to be a great golf tournament. As always, going to see carnage with all of that water in play, tons of swings up and down that leaderboard, which makes it one of the best events to watch on TV. Maybe not the best event to have money on, particularly from a fantasy perspective, just because you have so many of those swings. And if you have, winnings at one point, you end up losing at the end of the week, or you go from losing to winning. It can definitely be a little bit of a ride there. But with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into what I saw for today. Like I said, mostly what we see year in and year out, but the rough could be the one major exception. It was very dry conditions over the last 2-3 weeks down here in Florida. I played around yesterday, and the fairways at the course I was playing were bouncy. They were like trampolines. I was getting a ton of rollout. If you know anything about Florida golf, it's typically very damp. I mean, we're at a very low level, oftentimes below sea level down here in South Florida. As a result, you really don't get much rollout, right? Usually wherever your drive lands, you might get 5 to 10 yards at the very most, but that was not the case. And here at PGA National, that was also what I saw. We got plenty of rollout. There were players hitting irons off of the tee, mostly driving irons, and they were still getting rollout, which if you know anything about a driving iron, it's much more spinny than a driver. You typically only get that first bounce. You saw guys getting 20 to 30 yards of rollout with those driving irons. Now, granted, they were hitting stingers. It wasn't like they were launching them up into the air, but that's definitely something of note. On the greens, one thing I'll say is that with these dry conditions, you also saw them firmed up as well. You were seeing plenty of rollout, especially that first bounce. You got about 5 to 6 feet at times. I saw Michael Thompson hit a 170-yard, what was probably a 9-iron for him, and it hit the front of the green and bounced the whole way to 3/4 of the way into the green. The pin was in the front, so you had absolutely no shot of getting it close. In fact, the only one in the group to get it close was the amateur who was hitting his third shot onto the green. He had laid up right about 70 yards short of the green, and he had a wedge, and it did stick. So it's not like they're impossible. They are relatively receptive as long as you have a wedge in hand. If you do have some of these longer clubs, getting it to stop at least within 10 feet of where you're bouncing it is pretty much going to be impossible. Something to note as well is that the rough is impacted by these firm and fast conditions. There's a lot of dry spots. There's places where the rough is pretty much non-existent, particularly where a lot of the patrons are walking, and even where it's inside of the ropes where you're getting some of that irrigation, it's 1 to maybe 2 inches at the very most. So players that are hitting it offline, they aren't going to be dealing with very much of a penalty in this Bermuda rough, which it's still Bermuda, so you're still dealing with having to judge those lies, which can be a little bit more tricky than bent grass or ryegrass, that type of thing. But it also brings in a little bit of a negative in the fact that that rough isn't going to grab your golf ball. And as I'll show on the screen right here, you don't have very much room at all at this golf course when you miss these fairways. It can be 5 to 10 paces at times from the short grass and you ending up in a water hazard and taking a penalty stroke. That means that that rough that typically grabs those golf balls might not be doing that this time around. So it really goes both ways at a golf course with all of these hazards in play. Sometimes the rough ends up being your friend. Another thing to note here is that we are seeing greens that are firm, but I'd say that they're fair because they're not running that fast. Maybe it was because of all the water that those fire trucks were putting on the greens. In fact, you could actually see some of the fire trucks putting water on the greens that were already been played during the Pro-Am. And they were running at right around 12.5, 13 still, which of course is faster than what you're going to see at most munis. In terms of PGA Tour speeds, right about average. But here at the Honda Classic, here at PGA National, they're typically running at like 13.5, 14s by weekend. We could very well still see that if it ends up firming up throughout the weekend. If we don't get any rain, that type of thing, could see speeds upwards of that on the weekend. But for right now, they're at least fair, I'd say, because greens, you're not going to see putts really run away from you unless you're putting downhill, severely misjudge the pace, that type of thing, which should at least counteract some of the firmness of these greens. Something we can note is that from experience, the conditions down here, like I said, were firm and fast in the fairway. So that is going to cause players to kind of lay back a little bit more. Like I said, we did see a lot of players hitting driving irons off of the tee. And even some of the shorter players were hitting irons off of the tee. I noticed that there were guys like Padraig Harrington that on a 440-yard hole, we're hitting iron off of the tee. And that's not something that we see very often. Of course, guys like him, if they're going to lay up, it's usually going to be with something like a 3-wood. But like I said, you were still getting that rollout even with some of those shorter clubs. So perhaps the players didn't feel a need to go out there and hit a full bore shot. And something to note as well is that hole was also downwind. So he was getting a little bit of help from that as well. Another thing to note is that wind was a factor today. We didn't have any crazy wind. We had about 10 to 15 miles an hour of sustained winds with about 20, maybe 25 mile an hour gusts from time to time, which is about what we're used to seeing down here in Florida. If you have just like an average day of weather, that's what you can expect, right? It's not going to blow you over or anything like that. But when you're playing golf, it surely makes a lot of a difference. The issue is tomorrow we're going to see crazy wind. You're going to see about 20, 25 mile an hour sustained winds, potentially 30, 35 mile an hour gusts, potentially even stronger than that towards midday, which means that tomorrow the scoring conditions are going to be rough. And I really think that's why they were putting all the water on the golf course. I mean, obviously, if we're expecting it to be pretty blustery out there Thursday, probably for Friday as well, we got to try and protect these players at least a little bit. So that's what I'm going with. That's really what it looked like, what they were doing today. You had a few pro-am groups. We're going to talk about that as well because I think it's important. They went out there and shot 14 under par for 18 holes. Of course, there's a team aspect to that. So it's not like somebody went out there and made 14 birdies individually. But from what I noticed, you saw a lot of these tour players sticking it close, particularly the guys that were playing downwind. Then they didn't have to deal with side wind, all that sort of fun stuff. They were taking advantage, particularly in some of the shorter par fours when they had wedge in hand. Louis Oosthuizen looked extremely sharp. Same thing with Daniel Berger. In fact, by the time I left the golf tournament, not everyone had played their Pro-Am. Louis was in first place. Daniel Berger was in the top 5. Chris Kirk was in the top 5. A few other guys in the top 5 that were a little bit surprising. I mean, Brooks Koepka was also in the top 5 for a little bit. He ended up dropping out of it. At the bottom of the board, we had guys like a Stuart Sink, a Jason Duffner, a Mackenzie Hughes, that all through like 14 or 15 holes were like even par or even 1 under par, which you guys know anything about for a team Pro-Am, that's pretty atrocious. And of course, there's the team aspect to it. The other guys in the group matter. He could have had to carry the group for all I know in any of those circumstances, but it's at least something to look into. The leaderboard isn't online. I haven't been able to find it ever since I left, but that's what I could tell you from whenever I left. One thing to note is that Daniel Berger was playing golf. He was playing good golf, you would expect if he was up there in the top 5 at the Pro-Am, and he finished his Pro-Am round. He got through all 18 holes, so I think that's something to note there. If the guy is going to be 100%, he's going to be a huge part of my lineups this week if people are going to be hesitant to use him. And as of right now, with some of the ownership numbers, it looks like people aren't running to the window to play Berger, and he really might be a good play if that's the case. Another thing to note is I'm going to go ahead and show some more pictures from the course. You can see that over the 17th green, and this is the case at almost every hole here at PGA National, even good shots are going to be penalized. You can see some of the drop-off areas. I'll show one here. I'm also going to show one at a hole without water. Even some of the best shots you'll hit, where you can end up 5 to 10 feet from the pin, are going to roll off into chipping areas that leave you maybe looking at bogey at best. Of course, if you hit into the water, you're looking at bogey at best. But even with some of these chip-off areas, as I just showed you, you're still going to be dealing with a hard shot to get up and down because of how much slope is on that part of the green. It's borderline unfair at times. Again, you can be quote-unquote hitting the green and still ending up in a really bad spot. But that's just really what makes this golf course difficult. And it's not something that you can really appreciate unless you're there in person, unless you get angles like I'm sending you here in this video. But I thought that was something that you guys might want to see. Another thing to note is that the mounding between the holes is quite severe. As you guys can see in this picture, the picture doesn't quite show you the depth. You can't really see the height as much as I'd like to show you. But the mound right there is at least 25, 30 feet high. It's massive. It's relatively long. If you end up hitting at any part of the hill, you're getting a severely sloped lie, which of course, that hole specifically is the hole number 6, which was a par 5 change into a par 4. It's about 480 yards into the wind, with that side hill over there, and on the other side you have a lake, so there's no real good place to miss. So I like to show that because a lot of people say like, oh, there's water in 15 holes, but you can miss to the interior, blah blah blah. If you miss to the interior, you're hitting on that massive mound, and that honestly might be worse than hitting it in the water at times, especially depending on the lie that you get on that hill. So I wanted to go ahead and show you guys that. Something else to note is that the wooded areas are extremely dense. They haven't taken out a lot of the trees. In fact, they've let a lot of the growth and a lot of the wildlife in these natural areas grow out. So if you end up hitting the ball into these woods, good luck trying to chip out, let alone advance the ball to the green. Much like at the Players Championship, if you're missing offline, not keeping it in the grass, you're going to have a hard time even making bogey. Sometimes you're looking at double or triple bogey at the very best, and that is certainly the case for some of the holes on the front nine at the Honda. The back nine is really more wide open, unless you're on holes 14 and 15 where you have a wooded area to the left. It's really holes 1, 2, and 3. Actually, I guess 4 and 5 as well do have a little bit of a wooded area. But outside those 7 to 8 holes, it isn't a huge factor. But if you end up getting into it, it could really ruin your day. So I wanted to go ahead and show you just how dense that stuff can be. And imagine if you're on that right side. I mean, you can just end up completely completely blocked out there. Another thing I wanted to note as well is that you guys can see that the golf course in general just looks great. I mean, look at this picture right here. This is hole number 9. You can see the forced carry over there. It's beautiful. It's going to be picturesque for this week, but as beautiful as it is, it can also be a little bit intimidating, right? The farther left you take this drive, the more aggressive you want to be. The green is over that set of palm trees over there to the left. The more water you bring into play, which is of course nightmare fuel for all of us amateurs at home. For these pros, it's doable, but at the same time, if you're on Sunday, if you're on Saturday, you have the lead, that type of thing. These are the exact type of holes that go ahead and bite you up. So for as beautiful as it is, it can be absolute carnage, and that's what I'm expecting for this week. If there's been any change to my modeling, it's just been the iron play even more so important. Because you're dealing with greens that are fair, I don't think that putting is going to be as much of a factor as it might have been early in the week around the green as well. I'm really looking for the guys that can keep themselves in play off the tee, so driving accuracy, and of course shots gained approach. A lot of the hazards at this course are around into greens or around the greens in general, like I was saying before. So keeping yourself in play, putting yourself in scoring position is always the key factor to success here. So of course we're going to have our live stream tonight. That'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So look forward to that. I'll be talking even more about the modeling, some of the changes that I've been making there. Of course, our player poll for DFS, any live questions that you have. If you guys have any questions you want to know about the course from what I saw today, maybe that I didn't mention during the video, go ahead and feel free to let me know down below. If I had to take a prediction, I think the winning score this week is going to be 10 under par. I think I said 9 under par earlier in the week. I think it might be slightly lower than that. And for a cut line, I'm going to say +2. That's what I'm going to go with, especially with the wind that we're expecting on Thursday. We get crazy wind on Friday as well, +3 or +4 cut line. But maybe go ahead and let me know before you get out of here too, guys, what you guys think the cut line is going to be. Would love to hear that from you as well. Historically, it's either between even par and maybe 4 over par if it gets really bad from time to time. But go ahead and let me know what you guys think down below. As always, really appreciate you guys stopping by, enjoying the content. I know this isn't the best produced video, right? Just wanted to get it out there, give you guys my thoughts from what I saw today. And going into the future, I'm going to be at the Players. I'm also going to be at the Valspar Championship. I'll try to do a similar type of video, maybe a little bit better produced next time now that I know what I'm doing. So again, I appreciate all of you guys. I look forward to seeing you guys later tonight for that live stream, and good luck this week.